Hello, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful and insightful discussion to the earlier panel. My name is Megan Woff. I am from the Special Competitive Studies Project. For our next panel on the future of defense innovation, I am honored to welcome to the stage General C.Q. Brown Jr., the United States Air Force Chief of Staff and one of our nation's most accomplished military leaders, the Honorable Michele Fournoy, the co-founder of West Exec Advisors, former United States Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and a member of the SCSP Board of Advisors, Dr. Eric Schmidt, Chair of the Special Competitive Studies Project and former CEO of Google and Alphabet, and H.R. McMaster, the 25th National Security Advisor to the President of the United States and retired United States Army Lieutenant General, who will be joining us virtually. They will be joined for a conversation by Ylli Bajraktari, CEO of the Special Competitive Studies Project. Over to you, Ylli.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everybody. General McMaster, good to see you online. So good to have you. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you on our second panel, The Future of Defense Innovation. And I cannot think of four leaders that inspire and motivate all of us. And they come from private sector, civilian leaders, and military leaders. And so I'm really honored to moderate this panel today and welcome General C.Q. Brown Jr. to the stage, Michele Fournoy, Eric Schmidt, and General McMaster calling in from California. The purpose of this panel really is twofold. We're going to look at how is the technology changing the character of warfare? And I think there's no better case to look at that what's going on right now in Ukraine. Eric has been there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Ukraine and the lessons learned we can take from that conflict today with General McMaster, Michele, and General Brown. The second purpose is with this change happening right now, what are the new demands placed on our Department of Defense? How is private sector changing? So we're going to discuss a little bit about where the technology is going and how we can adapt faster in the space. Before we kickstart the panel, I really want to note that we just released our new report, an updated version of the Offset X called the Closing the Deterrence Gap and Building the Future of the Joint Force. So I want to thank Justin, Luke, Ilbert, and JJ for working really hard on this with Greg Grant also, before I forget that. And really the report is looking at what are some of the lessons learned we're seeing in Ukraine, what is the Chinese case for victory, and then, we provide detailed prescription on what we need to do as a country, as the Department of Defense, to make sure that we have a solid deterrence between now and 2030 as we go through these critical years that President Biden called them the decisive decade. So without further ado, I want to turn over to our panelists because I'm sure you want to hear from them. So I'm going to ask general questions to all of you. First with what are we seeing? We're going to start with the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. So I'm going to ask you to share what do you think the future of warfare is telling you from what's going on the ground right now? What are some of the lessons that China is taking from the conflict there? And what are some of the lessons we should be taking from the conflict in Ukraine going forward? General Brown, if you don't mind starting us off, then I'm going to go next to Michele, General McMaster, and then finish with Eric. Sir.
Well, first of all, it's a real honor and pleasure to be here. And Stephanie, having spent a little time with Ash, this is a great way to recognize his influence on many things that we do. I think that there's a few things that I've taken away based on this current conflict is that, first of all, most conflicts are not short. And you can very quickly underestimate how long it's going to take to achieve your objectives. The importance of logistics in an environment like this, and then also understanding the value of an NCO core, but also understanding the will to fight from your adversary. And I think in some cases for Mr. Putin, definitely underestimated. Maybe we may have underestimated some of that aspect as well. As an airman, I also think about air superiority. And you got to think about air superiority in a different way. Neither side really has it. A traditional Air Force, but as I've talked to Eric a number of times, just the drone activity that's ongoing, that's another dynamic of air superiority that you have to think about based on how military capability may be delivered. I think our adversary our patient challenge at PRC is learning that as well. And ideally, that's the lesson you want to take away. Any conflict that you might start is not going to finish in a very rapid manner. And it can get very complicated very soon. I think the other aspect that they have learned is the strength of partnerships and alliances. And we've been able to see that, how NATO has grown by one country, hopefully soon to be another. But just what we've been able to do with our international partners, not just within NATO, but in my engagement with my counterparts from all around the world, the value of those alliances and partnerships and how together you can move forward, not just from a military standpoint, but from other instruments of power within the government. Thanks, Michele.
Well, first of all, I just want to add my words of thanks to SCSP and also to Stephanie Carter here. And, it's such an honor to be at an event like this honoring Ash's contributions. We really would not be having this conversation were it not for him. So I'm very pleased to be here. When I think about what lessons China should be learning and what we should be learning, I hope that President Xi looks at this and thinks, maybe I should be a little careful about what I wish for here. The assumption that you can rapidly and fundamentally change the status quo and create a new reality, change a regime, take over a country quickly and painlessly, I think it's pretty clear that it's a lot more complicated than you might think. Second thing, I'd be worried about, in an autocratic system, an authoritarian system, can I trust what my leaders, what my subordinates are actually telling me? It's not exactly a leadership climate where it's where you take risk to speak truth to power. So the plans that are presented to you may not actually survive contact with reality. I would be very worried about the international response, how the West has come together, U.S. and allies, to actually support Ukraine. I think we could expect a different constellation of partners, but a very strong international response if there was unprovoked aggression against Taiwan. The challenges associated with logistics, combined arms operation, if it's as difficult as it's been for Russia across a fairly limited land border, think about how hard it's going to be to do that across 200 kilometers of water and ocean. I'd be worried about the fact that what if the Taiwanese people resist? They're going to be fighting for their homeland. They're going to be fighting for their way of life, their democracy. I don't think the PLA has thought a lot about facing an insurgency or strong resistance in Taiwan. So I'm hoping that Ukraine should be a cautionary tale for President Xi. But for us, in terms of what we learn, I think the primary lesson is we have got to focus on strengthening deterrence. We have to make sure that Xi lacks confidence in his ability to achieve his goals quickly and with ease. We have to be able to deny that ability. We have to convince him and show him that the costs would be very detrimental and not worth the use of force to solve the Taiwan problem. I think the next 5 years are critical in really strengthening deterrence. And that's where we should be focusing a good portion of our attention.
Thank you. General McMaster.
Hey, Ylli, thanks to you at SCSP for the great work you're doing and the opportunity to be on this panel with four people I admire in honor of someone I know we all admire tremendously. I would just say that, hey, there are some continuities we're seeing in this war as well. So I think whereas we focus oftentimes on changes that we're seeing, I think we keep an eye on the continuities. What we're seeing in Ukraine is an example of old and new being combined. And what is old and what are the continuities? I think includes that, hey, the consolidation of military gains to get to a political outcome, that's always been and will remain essential to winning, achieving a favorable outcome in war. I think after the frustration of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we're just not going to do that anymore. And I think we just want to make war like a big targeting exercise. Well, I think we're seeing it in Ukraine, a corrective to that kind of thinking. Also, to Michele's point, to actually deter, you have to be able to demonstrate your ability to fight and win, to deny a potential enemy their objectives, and they have to know it. And I think we have to recognize that, hey, deterrence isn't foolproof. You know? And I think people are fighting for the same reasons today that Thucydides identified 25, 30 years ago: fear, honor, and interest. And so if deterrence isn't foolproof, I think we're going to need a lot more investment in defense across our alliances and in the U.S. to demonstrate our ability to fight effectively for at sufficient scale and for ample duration to win. And then, of course, what we're seeing is, hey, war is uncertain. I think there's this belief now. There's often a belief that new technologies will lift the fog of war. Remember that from the Revolution Military Affairs days? I think even with the tremendous advances in AI-related technologies, actually we're going to be more and more in the realm of uncertainty. And the future course of events, of course, is going to always be uncertain because of the continuous interaction with enemies. And as General Brown said, war is ultimately a contest of will. So remember those continuities, I think, is important. Continuities at the tactical operational level. Hey, how about logistics, right? And I think the Russians learned that the hard way. So as we innovate, we need to innovate and really with an emphasis on demand reduction, the means of resupplying organizations and sustaining freedom of movement and action at the end of extended and contested lines of communication in often austere environments. Hey, how about combined arms? The old combined arms, that there's now no one arm that's decisive, and you have to integrate infantry, mobile protected firepower, protected mobility and fires and air power and electromagnetic warfare capabilities. And it's really rock, paper, scissors, in combat. And the Russians are only using one of those at a time. And it's one of the reasons why they've been ineffective in close combat. And that leads to the final, I think, important continuity here is, hey, close combat overmatch matters. I think we always want to fight war from distance, make it tidier, neater, more of just like a targeting exercise. But what you're seeing is, what are they fighting for? Control of territory, populations, resources, their own security. So I think these continuities are important. And of course, there are some tremendous changes, many of which I think Eric will probably highlight here based on the great work that he's done and the visit, Eric, you had to Ukraine. I mean, incredible speed of innovation and the private sector involved in ways that are unprecedented. Obviously, with the integration of all sorts of drones, for example, I think we're seeing the emergence of a kind of a scary drone missile strike complex that we have to defend against more effectively. But also, look at Starlink and the use of commercial communications in ways that has proven immensely important to the Ukrainians. So I'll just stop there. The overall point is, hey, there is a lot of change that we're seeing and harbingers of maybe how warfare will evolve. But there are a heck of a lot of continuities as well.
General McMaster, before I turn to Eric, the one thing I would ask you to comment is Chinese lessons from Ukraine, because I've heard you speak about this many, many times, and obviously I'm biased when it comes to your comments. So can you elaborate on some of the lessons that maybe China is taking from Ukraine before I turn it over to Eric?
Yeah, hey, I really don't know. I mean, I want to hear what everybody else thinks about this, because I don't think any of us know yet. We do know that the Chinese are studying this extremely closely, right? The experience of the Ukrainians and the Russians in this war. I hope what they conclude is, hey, looking good on parade in Tiananmen Square is pretty easy compared to actual war. And I hope that the valor of the Ukrainians, their courage, as well as the difficulty that the Russians have encountered, will give them pause in connection with trying to subsume Taiwan by force. But they also might conclude that they've got a fleeting window of opportunity to do so as they see the United States and our allies and partners waking up to this. Japan doubling its defense budget, Taiwan integrating, hopefully soon, the $19 billion of backlogged military capabilities that have been purchased and are on the way to Taiwan. The improvements in defense that Australia has been making. So I just don't know, really. And I think we have to ask that question about the Taiwanese as well. I hope that this has been an example to bolster the Taiwanese will, as Michele highlighted the importance of that, and CQ did as well. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I don't know, Ylli. We have to pay attention to that question.
Thank you, sir. Eric, you've been in Ukraine. What can you share with us? Some of the lessons learned from there, and what can China and us learn from the conflict there?
Thank you, Ylli. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm here to start with because 8 years ago, I will never forget this image. I'm in a hallway in Davos, and Ash Carter runs down with this enormous energy he has and said, "I have an offer for you." And I figured I'd do this for like a year or two. 8 years later, he changed my life. That's why I'm here. So thank you, Stephanie. I'm glad everybody's here. I got interested in Ukraine partly because of what was going on, but also because I wanted to see what a modern war fought with technical people would look like. And so here's the basic principles. The first is that, as General McMaster mentioned, communications is essential, and not just communications among the military, but to all the civilians. And what they did is they built an app, technically known as DIIA, which allowed citizens to report the locations of tanks. They were AI classified and then targeted. That's how the initial invasion was stopped. Today in Ukraine, the majority of the commercial innovation is in drones. And there are roughly two categories of drones. They call them category 1 and 2. The first I'm going to describe as a simple, relatively straightforward suicide drone that goes a certain distance and hits its target and you're done. And the second one goes out and back and is obviously much more capable, much smarter, much more expensive. There's a huge debate as to whether which approach works, and the answer is we're going to find out. What's interesting to me is that, and one of the things that I learned in working with the military is I have enormous respect for the men and women who serve our nation because of their courage, and I have none. So from my perspective, if I were in uniform, I would want 50 drones ahead of me and 50 drones behind me, protecting me, right, doing my mission under the command of our great leaders. And this is a fundamental change in how we're going to conduct war. So the combination of autonomy, which is systems that make their own decisions, which is coming, and the ability to do drone and essentially independent action will change war as we know it in our national defense.
Thank you, Eric. So we started with just looking at the current security environment in Ukraine and some of the lessons learned going forward. Next, I would like to turn into, is the department ready for the changes that are happening? What are you seeing in challenges and opportunities in that space? And what else can we do to really move forward in adopting these capabilities, transforming the department as Dr. Carter has worked so hard for years. So, Michele, let me start with you since you know the department extremely well. There are a lot of initiatives happening right now. The secretary has announced several offices. DIU has been elevated to report to the secretary. So how do you assess the current state of department's efforts to reach out and get up to speed with what's happening and really transform towards the future?
Right. So, let's start with the positive. I think, the department has made a lot of progress since, the time when Ash Carter first sort of recognized that a lot of the cutting edge of innovation had moved out of defense R&D and into the commercial world. And so, as, Eric coined the phrase, it's not an innovation problem now, it's an innovation adoption problem. And our procurement system is not set up to really reach into the commercial sector and rapidly scale innovation with speed. So, we have created a number of offices, DIU, the various services, AFWorks, AFRL. There are various offices that are out there scanning the environment, scouting for technology solutions, bringing them in, prototyping them, demonstrating them, experimenting with them. And hats off to Congress, giving the department lots of authorities to actually prototype and do that. Where we're still kind of stuck is moving from that successful prototype or experiment to rapid production and integration at scale. And I think there are several problems there. First is the human problem that, people don't like to change how they do business. And unless you take a portion of the acquisition cadre and you train them differently on here's how you work with iterating commercial technology and bringing it into the force, and then you incentivize and reward them with promotions and a career path and so forth, you're just going to have you'll end up having some exceptional individuals who lean forward and take risk despite the system, as opposed to the system supporting a new set of behaviors that will help more innovation get across the valley of death. The other thing I think that we do need from Congress is some relief on how they allocate resources. There are hundreds and hundreds of lines of different programs in the budget, and so money's managed by program. I think we need to move more towards what you find in the private sector, which is mission-oriented portfolios. So you have a funding that is going towards a certain mission set that includes a number of programs in it, but allows the department to be, leaders to be smart CEOs and make trade-offs within that portfolio, depending on what's working, what's not working, and so forth. Because we have really hamstrung ourselves in the ability to learn from and to also to allow for disruptive technology of the kind that Eric's describing to come in and change the program, change the budget, accelerate our adoption.
John?
Well, what Michele kind of laid out, there are pockets, whether it's DIU or AFWorks for the Air Force and the other services. But there's a lot of innovation on one side, but there's not the process to be able to get things into production, to get the capability into the hands of our service members. I was in a meeting here recently with one of our offices in the Pentagon, and it said we probably don't need to spend as much time in the innovation side because there's a lot of good innovations going on. We just need to provide them the operational problem we're trying to solve. We need to build more infrastructure on the other side of the valley, and it's almost like Field of Dreams: build it and they will come. It's how you bring in and nurture one of these the good ideas, and then build an infrastructure for them to go into production and to scale. But I do see part of this is there are restrictions, and I think there's things in law, there's things in policy, and there's things in practice. And I think we could probably change the practice and the policy while we work on the law to move much faster. We were talking a little bit earlier today is. We have the talent to do this, and we actually have the authorities to do many of the things, but we have a kind of a practice. If you go outside the lines, you kind of get your hands slapped and you get back in line. We need more disruptive thought processes within the Department of Defense, honestly, to connect with the disruptive thought technology that's going outside of the Department of Defense, and how do you align the two of those together to move forward. So we're making progress, but I just personally don't think we're moving fast enough in certain areas. And there's many that want to work with the Department of Defense. We just don't have to make it so hard.
Thanks. General McMaster?
Hey, well, Joe Brown, I apologize for what we said before. I think one of the things we needed to even elevate our perspective a little bit and just think about really the 4 key tasks that we need to perform for us to be able to innovate and to stay ahead and make sure that our joint force has the competitive advantages we want it to have. And that's to think, to learn, to analyze, and implement. And I think thinking clearly about future war and laying a strong conceptual foundation for future war. Maybe learning, I think from our over-enthusiasm for the revolution of military affairs in the 90s and paying attention to continuities as well as change. But in terms of learning, I think we need a framework for learning across the joint force. And this is where I'd like to see the reinvigoration of the joint warfighting challenges. And these are just kind of first order challenges that never really go away, but you have to learn about them and develop interim solutions in a sustained manner over time, and to ensure that you're learning, in a focused, sustained, and cumulative manner rather than, episodically and repetitively and so forth. And so what's an example of a first order question would be how to develop and sustain a high degree of situational understanding in complex environments and against adaptive enemies. Never going to go away. But what you require is an integrated solution to that integrates maybe a whole range of technologies and new doctrine and integrating these new technologies into organizations and with people. So I just think the framework for learning, right? I mentioned one already, which is how to sustain freedom of movement and action at the end of extended and contested lines of communication in austere environments, or what Eric alluded to is how to protect your force against this emerging drone missile strike complex in a more transparent environment where your adversary is going to have access to all sorts of commercial surveillance capabilities, low Earth orbit imagery, and so forth. And then analyze what we're learning to architect kind of really solutions, inner solutions to these problems, and to ensure that they're really integrated solutions that deliver on these capabilities, and to continuously analyze these. I mean, we ought to touch these at least once a year. How well are we doing on this challenge? And then finally, what you've all been talking about is implementation, reducing the barriers to rapid implementation and scaling up. So I think as we assess our ability to integrate, maybe just think about these 4 tasks of thinking, learning, analyzing, and implementing.
Thank you, sir. Eric, you have observed the work of the department for 8 years now. You've visited many bases. What are some of the things that have happened during this time frame that you thought gives you hope? And what are the things you think we should accelerate and change?
So thank you. One of the things that we did is we visited more than 100 bases around the world. And, the theory is to sort of understand what people are actually doing. And there's just a lack of software. There's a lack of software at every level. The HR system, the travel system, the email system. Does this sound familiar to our military folks here in the room? Just fix that to start with. The good news about software is that there are now hundreds of companies that have been formed that want to serve, they want to help, they want to make money, and they can't find someone to talk to. So the senior leadership in the military and the Pentagon get it. Over and over again, they say they know what they want. They just don't know how to get it through the system. You've got the supply over here, right? And you just have to make some changes. Part of the root of this was that software was treated as sort of think of it as a repair service. It wasn't treated as its own assembly line. I remember speaking to one particularly senior general who was in charge of a very large part of the military. And I said, here you are. I said this in a more polite way. You're a big cheese. You have all these Marines around you, right? Why can't you get 100 people doing software to work for you to fix all the little problems, just the little ones? And he said to me, straight-faced, I did. And then they were taken away from me. And I said, how were they taken away from you? And they said, yes, because we couldn't give them the right allocation code. So think about that. We've got the smartest and most capable military leaders. And then in this particular administrative process, this gentleman could not get what he needed to do even the simplest things. So I'm a strong proponent of giving our military leaders and our national security leaders more flexibility with respect to how they allocate software resources. Software, remember, is not like procuring a weapon system. Software is never done, right? You're always fixing it. You're always improvement. If every one of our leaders, just to finish my pitch here, had the ability to have 50 or 100 software people under their command to do whatever it is came to their mind, we would be so much more efficient. And by the way, none of these barriers exist in Ukraine, and that's exactly how it works.
Thanks, sir. I'm gonna start right there with you, and I'm gonna turn over the conversation to AI. I mean, the mission of the SCSP is really looking at how do we remain competitive in the space as a nation. Eric, I know you've covered this issue and you work really closely the issue of large language models. So I wanted us to hear from you. Where do you see this trajectory going? How do you assess what's happening right now? And then I'll turn over to the conversation with Michele and others in terms of what does it mean for DoD.
I think my question back is, how many hours do you have to get into this? Again, there's some good news here, and then there's some concerning news. So I've never seen a phenomena like we're seeing now, and I've done this for 50 years. I've never seen the rate of change, the rate of investment. It's extraordinary. It's occurring globally. The Trump and Biden administrations did a good job in slowing down China. So at the moment, the leadership in this area is occurring in the United States. The Europeans are hopelessly behind because they start with regulation, which never works. So effectively, it's ours to play with. We as a nation have control over this technology right now. The current framing is basically there are frontier models, which are, you would know them as OpenAI, GPT-4. There's one series of ones coming out of Google. There's a private company called Anthropic. There's a couple of other candidates. And these things have enormous power. They suck all the information in from these various systems, and they integrate it in ways that produce emergent behavior. The computer scientist cannot, speaking as a computer scientist, cannot explain to you why this occurs, when it occurs, and what it's doing, right? So it really is magic right now. There are people working very hard to answer all these questions, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. But this is an American leadership opportunity, and the benefits are enormous. Imagine an AI tutor, imagine an AI doctor. These are helping teachers, helping doctors do better jobs. I can go on and on. People are using these techniques in chemistry and biology and science to discover new things. The technology that was invented predicts the next word, sentence, and paragraph. This was invented at Google in 2017, called the transformers. This technology, the layer of individual, middle, and high also applies to many other aspects in biology and science and so forth. It's all now being applied. You're going to see an acceleration of drug discovery. We're going to address climate change and so forth. The negatives are also very significant. A lot has been discussed about biological threats. The military has a whole project on this. I'm part of a congressional task force working on this. There's all sorts of issues around cyber attacks. Imagine I say as an evil person to the system, attack a country and tell me how you break in, right? So you can imagine those kinds of scenarios. And then there's all the issues around loss of faith in democracy because of social media. I'm actually more worried about something which nobody is talking about, which I've expressed to these folks privately, which is that the diffusion of this knowledge from these very expensive and specialized models to open source is occurring much quicker than I thought. And open source has the property that it moves us along very quickly, but it gives all of our advantages away to our competitors. Why in the world would you invent something this powerful and then choose to leak it to the Chinese, right? Not even I am that stupid. And yet, in fact, that's what we're busy doing. And this is a problem that as a nation, we have to address this year.
Thank you. Michele, when we were at the AI Commission, one of the questions we got time and again was AI for what? For DoD. And one of the things we recommended that we need as a nation to be AI ready for DoD by 2025. What we meant was the underlying infrastructure that you need, the data, the algorithms, and everything has to be ready by then. As you heard, Eric, these things are moving much, much faster. So how do you think AI will help DoD today and going forward?
How do I think?
AI will help DoD.
So I definitely think that, the enterprise applications that Eric was describing are absolutely critical for DoD just to be able to function as a more modern, effective, data-driven organization. But it's also really important for the warfighter. And I do think that while this is obviously a longer journey, given that President Xi has asked his military for options vis-a-vis Taiwan in 2027, even if we understand that may not be his preferred option, we need to be very confident in deterrence by then. And a lot of that will depend on how we take existing platforms and capabilities, marry them with new software solutions, including AI, to get different outcomes. So imagine a network, knitting our network of C4ISR networks together in a way that is truly agile and resilient, leveraging AI and other software to actually make it work more like a electrical grid, where if you're at risk of you're having an outage or you're being attacked or it's contested or some node is going down, the system is smart and intelligently reroutes traffic and so forth. And keeps functioning even in a contested environment. Figuring out how we use software to marry human beings and machines so that a human being can control those 50 drones before and behind. And that gives us tremendous advantage. leveraging AI to sort through all of the intelligence and just the massive amounts of information that comes at a decision maker to separate the wheat from the chaff, get the right insight to the right person at the right moment so that we make better, faster decisions than our adversaries. So these are near-term applications that could really make a difference. Again, I think the department is trying. They're trying to be data ready. The creation of the CDAO was a very important innovation. They are trying to move to the cloud, but we have seen how even that has been, very, very difficult because of contracts being contested and the like. But these are things that we have to move through urgently to actually be ready to deter, to be ready to fight, but also to be able to operate as a 21st century organization.
Thank you. General McMaster, you talked earlier about the risks from AI. I wanted to expand on that and just ask you, do you see any opportunities on the battleground that will come from AI? And also at the strategic level, what are some of the risks and other challenges we might face from AI being deployed now and in the future?
Absolutely. And I would just agree with what's already been said already in terms of some risks that Eric laid out and the opportunities Michele laid out. But I think it's already transforming logistics. And I think the Air Force has been a big lead under General Brown. Maybe you might want to comment on this. You know a lot more about it than I do. But I think, making logistics a lot more effective, resilient, efficient in ways that we could never do before because we couldn't anticipate, equipment failures, for example, and conduct maintenance in such an effective way. Or to use the electrical grid metaphor that Michele used, healing logistics networks as well, and to have greater reliance on our ability to sustain operations across vast distances. Of course, we've all talked about artificial intelligence technology's impact on intelligence, and I think what's really important is the ability for artificial intelligence to help us understand better what patterns of behavior are, but also to anticipate pattern breaks. And when you combine the range of technology, including large language models, just being able to access so much data and integrate, for example, imagery and signal intelligence and interrogation reports, and then to be able to display nodes in networks and see flows through enemy networks of people, money, weapons, and so forth. Can I think help you conduct operations in a much more effective way. On the downside, I do worry about content-based verification going away, right? And the degree to which this plays into deception in war, but also the way it can affect our confidence in who we are as a people and our democratic institutions and processes. I think we're going to see in future war an all-out assault on our will, our national will. It's already happening. We've seen the Russians doing this, going back to the 20s, and then Thomas Ridge's book. But then the continuous integration of technology, it's going to increase, by orders of magnitude here in terms of the danger. So those are, thoughts that are not original at all, but this is the way that I'm thinking about the opportunities and the dangers. The last thing I'll say is, hey, we have to make a fundamental choice, though. If we believe whether AI-related technologies are going to shift war more toward the realm of certainty or toward the realm of uncertainty. And because I think there are a series of other assumptions that flow from that fundamental assumption. And if we pick the wrong one, I'm on the uncertainty side. If you pick the certainty side, what you begin to stress is centralization over decentralization, planning over execution, or synchronization over initiative. So I think the force we design ought to be a force that takes advantage of AI-related technologies, but recognizes that warfare will remain in the realm of uncertainty.
General Brown, you have moved the Air Force towards adoption of these critical technologies. What are some of the lessons you have seen from adopting AI that other services might learn from the Air Force? I also know that you care about the talent a lot and recruiting talented individuals that come with tech background. So I know this is a two-part question, but given, I think, your passion for bringing the best and the brightest to help the Air Force with this task, I think I wanted to ask you that question as well.
Well, I appreciate the compliment that we're moving ahead of the other services, but I'm not so sure. And the reason I say that is I don't know that we fully understand AI and machine learning. I think we've made some progress in certain areas as an Air Force, just based on the, being in some cases, a more technological service than others. And I'd also say, our relationship with the Space Force as well. But I think too often, and for those of us that work in the Pentagon, you'll see AI and ML on a bunch of PowerPoint slides. It's true. As if it's the panacea that's going to solve all our problems. And we don't fully understand it. And, I've gotten smarter on this particular topic. And there's a lot of things, the more I learn, the more I figure out I do not know about how AI and ML can help us do things. I actually as I was listening to the other panelists, I had a thought experiment. If we were to ask these same questions to AI model, how would they respond? But the key part here is that we've got to continue to learn where the opportunities might lie. Well, one of my concerns is, as it was highlighted previously, is how it may be used by our adversaries in ways that we may not appreciate as we move forward. And so that's important. The things I'm thinking of from a talent management standpoint is looking at those that would have the background that will help us in this area. And data, I know, is very important associated with this. And so the aspect of those that have data science backgrounds, and we have a major that I've spent time talking to as a PhD in data science. That wasn't even a major when I was in college. And so the aspect of, how do you bring in that talent, and at the same time, they may follow a non-traditional career path that is not the standard norm. And, how do you incentivize them, keep them, engaged, and also allowing them to be promoted so they'll stay with us, whether they're in uniform or if they're civilian, but to build those relationships and give them, there's meaningful work out there. How do we make sure that we're looking after them, taking care of them, and continue to incentivize those that have that skill set and have that desire to work in the national security realm in this area.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll turn it over to you for any questions you might have. Secretary Carter, really, when you think about his background, his legacy, I think the one thing that I take away is that he was trying to have a whole of nation approach to technology competition, which I think you all have individually been part of this effort, and you've been trying really hard. As we face a competitor like China that has a civil fusion, what are some of the things that I think are still serving as a barrier in our public-private conversation that you would like to see us move forward much faster? And I'll start with you, General McMaster, because you have served both in the military, at the White House. You now are at Stanford, so you're much closer to the Silicon Valley. What are some of the things you see are still hindering this whole of nation approach to competition? And then I'll turn it over to Eric, who has been an observer of this for many, many years, and Michele and John Brown.
Hey, well, I'll tell you, if you had asked me this in 2018 when I first arrived here in Silicon Valley, I would have said, man, it's pretty bleak. We don't have the private sector involved in competitions. But I think based on the vision of Eric, who I think has led it. I mean, Eric made it cool again to get involved in national defense. If you're at the center of innovation here in Silicon Valley, so I think the will is there, and I think we don't communicate as clearly as we could what the needs are for national security and national defense and the joint force. And again, I mean, not to be a broken record on this, but I think this, something like joint warfighting challenges, simple questions, how to, and pose the problem, I think would be helpful in communicating that. And then, of course, I think the most immediate obstacle we face now is we have to see these companies that have developed solutions for some of our problems see a payoff. I mean, actually see programs of record and really adopting some of these capabilities at scale. So I would just say two things, communicating more clearly, but I do believe there is a tremendous desire to help now. And I think the people I'd put at the top of my list to thank is Eric Schmidt, but then quickly followed by Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I think for the competition.
Eric, you're on the top three. and General McMaster used you as a cool factor, but also as the top 3 notorious. So over to you.
I asked GPT-4, how will the Chinese use AI against us? There are some potential ways AI could be used against us. Cyber warfare, AI can be used to conduct cyber attacks, blah, blah, blah. Economic espionage, AI could help in the theft of intellectual property. Surveillance, AI can be used to analyze large amounts of data. Autonomous weapons, AI can be used to develop autonomous weapon systems. Information warfare, infrastructure disruption, economic disruption. Sure looks like GPT-4 has some pretty good answers for us, right, to help us so I think you call it human-machine teaming.
Yes.
Let's do human-machine teaming to discover how to do human-machine teaming. I think we've got a situation in Silicon Valley now where people they don't know who to call. And over again, I'm dealing with a small group. These are very smart people. They're typically commercial. They want to make money and they want to serve, right? There's no phone number to call, right? Plus, they don't use phones anywhere. They're too young. They don't know do they talk to a general? Okay, well, there's lots of them. Or maybe an admiral. What do they do? I mean, this is what we're dealing with. There's no binding function. And one way to solve that problem would be to build a sort of an induction group. Same way you bring in new recruits, bring in new technologies. DIU is a path for that, right? But it needs to be bigger or stronger, or maybe there's multiple ways. But I think that the reason to be optimistic is we have now agreement in Silicon Valley on the basics here, which is this stuff is important. And I think anyone who was confused saw what happened in Ukraine is no longer confused. And so I think you're going to see American at its best, right? Innovation in universities, the business sector, and then working with the government. I know it sounds Pollyannish, but I really do believe that with a relatively small number of changes inside the processes that identify software as something real and figure out how small companies that have these innovative approaches can get into a pipeline, right? Which is not just through the primes who are too slow. And remember, the primes are organized around the POM process and this very painful procurement process. And it's very difficult to change. But there's plenty of other ways to get this knowledge into the department. Michele?
Yeah, no, I agree. We are way beyond the immediate post-Snowden days where there was tremendous suspicion in the Valley of working with DoD, and that's in part thanks to Eric and others. So there's no shortage of talent and know-how, people who want to help. I agree. I think part of it is they don't know how to plug in. The department hasn't made it easy. It's tried to make it easier for them with things like DIU. And I'm just going to put in a plug for DIU's new leader, Doug Beck, who's going to
right in the front.
re-energize the organization and help it to realize its full potential, which we're very excited about. So people like me, West Exec, other firms end up being that informal coach on let's understand what you got. Let's understand the use cases. How do we map your potential customers? How do we help you approach them? How do you approach AFWorks? How do you approach DIU? How do you approach whoever? But still, even when they get to that point of prototyping, demonstration, having initial success, the handoff from an AFWorks into the Air Force POM or into some other longer term funding stream is still very difficult. So again, I think part of the solution, and we are seeing this, there are also funders now in Silicon Valley who I would call more patient capital, people who have a mission orientation and are saying, I don't have to see the same ROI that I would expect in the commercial sector in 3 to 5 years when I'm dealing with defense. I'm going to take a more patient approach, but that's not enough. The department has got, when we're talking about acquisition of commercial technology, we cannot use the sequential requirements. We're going to spend years defining requirements. Then we're going to go through all these sequential acquisition milestones. We have to have a different approach to commercial acquisition and integration, people who are trained and expert in that, and people who are incented and promoted and rewarded for that. And that to me is the missing piece that we can really, if we get after it, can really accelerate this adoption.
Joe?
Yeah, I think there's two key factors I think about. It's leadership and personal relationships. On the leadership side, I was told when I came in this job, whatever I'm interested in, people are going to be fascinated by. Meaning that if I start to look at things, then you will have, parts of the staff will then start to figure out how to move that forward. And so it does require my personal engagement to make sure the momentum continues, because I can say things and then hope that it's going to work and then figure out later that we're not moving forward. But I also think it's leadership, because if you're advocating for these types of things and continue to talk about them, you're able in a position to break down some of the barriers that we've highlighted here today, because there are many barriers and there's many pockets of resistance. And, one of my goals is to really figure out what those pockets of resistance are, the name, the office, phone number, and then bring them in the room, explain to them how they're impeding progress and show them the bigger picture. And I owe that to the airmen I'm privileged to lead to make that happen. There's also the personal relationships, and the relationships I built with those in Silicon Valley that see my passion for this, that want to work with the Air Force and want to work with the Department of Defense, but also with AFWERX, and having AFWERX build those relationships and doing a better job of, one, changing our culture, but two, turn those relationships into something that's going to provide capability as we move forward. One of the areas that we're just on the cusp of getting is working on bringing in industry into the Air Force. We have a program of education with industry. We'll send our officers and NCOs to go spend a year with industry. And so I've been thinking, well, how do we bring industry into the Department of the Air Force so they see how we work? And so we're working with Google, and we're real close to, the lawyers have to do the last few checks. But the goal is to bring someone in for 3 to 6 months so they can see how we operate. I want to make sure we put them in a place that doesn't crush their soul, where they can see the real value in the opportunities and then take that back. But also build a relationship with some of the, those of us in uniform and our civilians that can be long lasting, because we can get things done. As you know, a lot of things get done based on relationships. We can figure out how to get around the process and the policies. And then instead of having an exception to policy, sometimes I think just change the policy so the exception becomes the new rule. And that's the way we got to operate here in the future to make sure we're going to move as fast as we need to.
Thanks, sir. We have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions. I know we have mics being passed around, so I see a hand here in the middle until Hina gets the mic. Please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and
IDA. I have a question, I guess it's primarily aimed at Aaron. You're talking about the dangers of open source LLMs. I mean, we've seen from the leaked Google memo that a lot of people believe, and I certainly believe, that a lot of good work has been done in open source, so either through quantization to more consumer-grade hardware, through better ability to fine-tune on, say, like DVD-specific data sets, through tools like LangChain, which let us integrate with others, with databases and other tools. A lot of development is coming out of open source. Is there a way that we can concretely use open source, get the benefits of open source, but keep those models, the capabilities with responsible people doing responsible things, and keep them away from irresponsible people doing the opposite? Do you have any suggestions?
This is an incredibly astute question to which I don't know the answer. Mm-hmm. And I'm really struggling with it. So the context of this excellent question is that there was a leaked memo out of Google which talked about moats and so forth. But it was really a discussion of the rapidity of technology diffusion. And what is happening is that the frontier models are very, very quickly being engineered into smaller, more capable, quicker solutions very fast, faster than anything I've ever seen. And if those models are open source, then the regulatory structure that we put on the top models doesn't necessarily travel with it. There are many ideas on how to solve this problem. What I consider to be an excellent idea is that you build the Constitution into the model when you make it, but there's evidence that that can be stripped out. So again, we don't really know. I think the industry is going to propose roughly the following rule. if you're doing something of this nature, you have to, if you're doing something which involves either recursive self-improvement, which is obviously dangerous, or some kind of fine-tuning in these particular areas, you have to notify the government. And there's a number of regulatory examples in other industries that may approach that. But at this point, I'm speculating. This has happened so fast. It's happened in the last month. People haven't figured it out yet.
Thank you. Next question. There's a hand way back. Hina in the back. Right.
Hi, my name is Jordan Sun. I'm an Army veteran, State Department veteran, and also currently Vice President of Product at a robotics company. My question is to the general panel here. With 40% of PhDs are born overseas, and 50% of those PhDs who study AI-related research cite immigration barriers as one of the reasons why they leave this country. And given the ongoing military recruiting shortage, how might the military play a role in retaining this talent in the U.S.? Would it be possible to bring talent initiatives like the MAPME programs back so that we can retain this technology talent here?
General.
Can I give a one-word answer to that?
Yes, sir.
How about just amen? Amen.
General?
I just, I think there's plenty of opportunity that we have to continue to take a look at how we show show where we have a need. And it's whether those are in uniform or those outside of uniform that are getting advanced degrees and how we marry those up. One of the areas that I've been focused on as the chief here is now that we've got rid of below the zone promotions, we have more time to develop our officer corps, and same on the enlisted side. And because of that, we have more opportunities for our officers and NCOs to get advanced degrees, and particularly PhDs for the officers. The key point now is how do we make sure we're tracking that talent and putting them in the right place so they stay with us and continue to contribute. And the thing I'm also focused on is what type of PhDs are they getting, not just whatever they want to get, what's going to value not only them in their personal development, but also what's going to help the United States Air Force. So there's a bit of balance there. And then really how we tap into academia at large to be collaborative in our approaches, I think is also important.
Can I just jump in on the larger, if you're taking more of a whole of nation perspective on this, if the first thing we have to do is invest in the drivers of our own competitiveness. One of the things that is got to be on the table is rethinking our immigration policy. And I know people, I'll get a big eye roll, like, go dream about that. How is that going to work in our polarized society? But I do think they're one of the few areas of consensus in today's Congress across the parties is the challenge posed by China. And I think if we think through what kind of immigration policy do we need, what changes do we need to attract the best and brightest from around the world, as we have done in the past, and get them to build their lives here, their businesses here, bring their talents here and stay, I think that's a very important part of the discussion. And again, if you look at the founders in a place like Silicon Valley, half of them are either immigrants or first generation Americans. So we have to think about the whole of nation approach to how do we bring that human capital here. And then we have to think about the additional step of how do we bring it into the military and into tours of government service, which again is something that Eric's done a lot of thinking about as well.
We face a significant competition issue in quantum with China. The head of their quantum program was educated in America. We did not give the gentleman a visa. He went back to China, and now he is a competitive threat. This is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. I'm sorry to be blunt. There is a mechanism around national security visas. It should be established that people of the specialized skills that the generals need should get those visas. How much clearer can I be, right? We're now facing in a decade, store now, decrypt later. All of our secrets will be known by the Chinese because of this person. It's crazy.
I want to end the panel really on something.
I just want to add another example of immigration here. How about the Bajraktari brothers? How about those guys? As a good example.
Thanks. No, but I also wanted to end it on that note. There's no country in the world in which a person like me or Bear, or I think we have so many people on our team that are foreign born, get to work with Miss Fournoy in DoD, get to work for General McMaster at the White House, and then work with Eric at the Ag Commission, and now with SSB. So, I mean, I think
You are the American dream.
yeah, thank you. But really, I mean, we have to fix the immigration problem. I think because we have recruiting issues, which I think we have to address, and I think immigration could be part of that solution. But also, as you mentioned, Michele, some of our top leaders in the tech companies are foreign born. So fixing this issue should be, I think, a broader part of the policy conversation we need to have.
Why don't we just take all the really smart people out of China and move them to the US and put them in charge of fighting China? I mean, come on, it's just not that difficult.
I think you just made news, Eric, so we'll leave it there. And thank you all. You guys are tremendous leaders. General Brown, thank you so much for your time. Michele, as always, it's always good to see you. Eric, it's always a pleasure. General McMaster, thank you so much for doing this remotely, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person. Let's have a round of applause for all of them. Thank you.